This is a video to display the installation process of Call Manager to a C210 by first installing ESXi. First thing we're going to do is we're going to log into our SIMC management console at our IP address. This is very similar to an HP ILO remote management. Once we log in to administer the server, we can verify that we're at the correct server by going down to the IP address and noting the host name that we're on the correct server. Next thing we want to do is click on Remote Presence to enable the remote virtual KVM. We want to save that setting. And then also go over to the Virtual Media tab to enable remote virtual media so that we can point to ISOs on our local laptop rather than having to insert them into the physical server. Once we've set up those settings, we want to go back to the Summary tab, take the server and restart that, because we're actually going to go ahead and start with the ESXi installation. Once we've restarted the server, we want to click on this KVM button to go ahead and launch the KVM console. This again is allowing us to monitor and manage this server remotely. We don't have to have a local keyboard, mouse, and monitor plugged in. Once we're in the KVM console, we have the opportunity to go ahead and map a local disk or a local ISO to this server. We do that by clicking on Tools and Virtual Media. So now, setting up that virtual media, we want to go ahead and add a new image and browse for the local image of ESXi on our local desktop. Now we've clicked where we mapped that local ISO to this server. The next step is to continue to allow the server to boot. We see the option for the boot menu by pressing F6. We will press F6 and go in and configure this to boot off of the DVD drive, the ISO that we just configured. So Cisco Virtual CD/DVD. You can see it's boot off that ESXi ISO we pointed it to. So we start the installation process. Allow the application to load just like we would in any installation process. Now that we've loaded the files, we'll continue to let the rest of the application install. And then we begin the actual configuration process. So we'll press Enter to install, F11 to accept the end user license agreement. We'll then point it to our local array on our LSI RAID card that we've built out to do the install. Again, confirming the install with F11 and letting the installation run its course. For purposes of this video, I've sped up the time on this and allowed us to skip from 3% towards the end. Now that it's been successfully installed, we do want to reboot the server. As we reboot that server, we're going to go ahead and disconnect that virtual media so that we don't boot into the installation process again. And we're beginning the reboot now. As the server comes back up, we're going to want to go back into the boot menu with an F6, or go ahead and configure previously to boot off the local RAID array as the second piece. I've currently done that, so it's going to go ahead and search for the RAID array to boot off of, which it found, and it begins the rest of the installation process of loading VMware ESXi. Now we have ESXi completely installed. You'll notice that we have a DHCP address assigned. We want to press F2 to customize the system. We'll leave the password blank because by default that's what it's set to be. That'll be the first thing we want to change. Configuring the password now. The next thing you want to set up is the management network. As I mentioned previously, I've set this up in my lab to be a DHCP assigned address. We would want to go ahead and configure that and set it to a static configuration. That is a recommended best practice. And now VMware ESXi is set up and ready to start the process of installing our call manager. The next step is to build the virtual machine by deploying the template file. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that address that our ESXi server is. We're going to go to manage that through our vSphere client, enter that IP address with the username and password. You'll see here that there are currently no virtual machines in inventory. We do want to build one, and we can do that by File, Deploy, and the template. First we need to get the template, so we'll go out to the Cisco page, click on the templates link. We're going to choose the template for Call Manager for 7,500 users. I've downloaded that to my local PC. Now I want to deploy that in vSphere, File, Deploy, Template. I'm going to browse to that template on my local desktop. Click Open. Next. It's going to give us some details about that template and what its requirements are, how big it is. It's going to give us the opportunity to name that template. I'm going to name that CUCM Lab Build. Now it gives us the option to either thick provision or thin provision. This is how we allocate our hard drive space. For my lab environment, I did thin provision, but you do need the thick provision in production environments so we can guarantee hard drive space. Gives us a couple more details, and we can click Finish to build that virtual machine. We now see that virtual machine is built. We can list that in our inventory. Next thing we need to do is install Call Manager by pointing that virtual machine to an ISO. We'll put that ISO on the local data store. So if we click the Configuration tab, browse to the storage piece, this shows us our data stores. I can right click on that and browse data store. Next thing I want to do is create a new folder to drop my ISOs in. Now that I've created that folder, I will click on it and click the button that says Upload Files. I search to the ISO for Call Manager that I want to drop on that machine. And it'll begin copying that ISO to the local data store. This will allow us to point the virtual machine directly to that ISO and start the install process. For the sake of time in this video, I've fast forwarded the copying process of that ISO So we'll jump to the end very shortly here. And now that you can see that the ISO is copied to that data store, we can verify by clicking in our folder and see the file that we just dropped. The next step is going to be setting our virtual machine to install Call Manager by pointing it to the ISO that we just dropped down the data store. What we're going to do is we're going to right click on our virtual machine, edit settings, and we're going to add a new CD/DVD drive. So we'll highlight that, click add, click next. Now we actually want to use an ISO image because that's how we've chosen to do it. We're now going to browse for that ISO image that we've put on our data store, so we'll simply point it to where we just loaded it. In this case, that data store is local to this machine on the C series. Choose the ISO. Now it's important to note that we connect this at power on. What we're doing is we're mapping a logical CD drive that has this CD in it to our virtual machine. Once we've saved those settings, we're going to power on our virtual machine. We can see that it's currently off. So we click power on. Immediately after doing so, we want to click on the virtual KVM link so that we can monitor this process. As we can see, because we set that connected at boot up, it's instantaneously booted off of that mapped logical drive and has begun copying the Call Manager files over. And now you're in a very familiar interface where you're actually starting the process of installing Communications Manager. One point to note here is once you're in that KVM, you need to press Control-Alt to leave the KVM at any time. This is just a feature that allows you to get out of that full screen mode. For the purposes of time, I did speed up the entire installation process and have skipped to the end. You'll see a couple more things that you would go through in the initial installation of Call Manager, and then we'll hop towards the end. Final result you can see here is that we have a Call Manager and a virtual machine that actually looks very familiar to what you see today when it's applied on appliance. Thank you.